This is your host for Double Cross Radio tonight, Chuck Horton. I'm coming to you live from the Double Cross Radio studios, high atop the first story of my house here in Medford, Oregon. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's show is going to be mostly about Hillary Clinton, the evil witch. But before we get started and all that, I have a couple of current events news items that I thought were kind of interesting that happened this week and were probably worth repeating. First, Jeff Berwick of the Dollar Vigilante reported in his daily blog that one of his friends is a large shipper or shipping magnate or whatever you'd call it. He owns a lot of ships, we'll put it that way. And he said all of them are currently in port, tied up, because it costs more than he gets to ship stuff around the world. In other words, they're not getting paid enough for shipping their products, so they would just soon go broke having their ships in harbor as working real hard and going broke. So they're waiting, and Jeff had gone and done some additional research on it, and he found that there were hardly any ships at sea anywhere. Now, I think this might be just a bunch of people getting together to get prices to go up a little bit, and maybe that's really how it is. I mean, you don't want to just keep doing something because you need the cash flow, which apparently had been going on for quite a while. You're never going to get out of that situation. That's kind of, it's just bad news. And anyway, then today I was just driving home from doing some errands. I had, including a little bit of time at work today, and I was listening to the news at the top of the hour, and they said that the price of oil had gone up a little bit, and I wonder if this is connected with that shipping story, that there's hardly any ship, because a lot of the shipping that goes on is shipping oil from point A to point B to the refineries around the world that turn it into gasoline and all sorts of other heating oil and all sorts of other products that oil is fracked and distilled into. I should say cracked. They actually have cracking columns. They break the bonds of all these petrochemicals that are in there that make up oil, and they distill out in doing so, they heat them up. They actually make gasoline compounds, and they distill it out of the oil compounds, leaving kind of a tarry sludge, which then they use for asphalt. It's pretty interesting if you're into science and chemistry, but it's probably not the most interesting thing about it. What was most interesting is that I'm hearing from all the different economic analysts out there that oil could go to almost, down to around $10 a barrel. So the fact that it went up a couple dollars a barrel, and as always, the news story on network news is so short of details, it always leaves you wondering exactly what is this? Was this from the pump where it's coming out of the ground that it went up $2 a barrel, or is this from the tanker that's delivering it to the refinery that went up a couple dollars a barrel? Because that could go a long ways to making up that loss that those shippers were seeing in the earlier days, and maybe that an agreement had been reached and they were now shipping out oil at a higher rate so they could pay for the more expensive shipping costs that are being incurred by people. I don't know. It's just something to keep your eye on. But I really think that all the economic, some people call it fear porn, but I call it telling the truth, but all the economic news or predictions that we've been making on this show the past 3 years are coming to fruition right now. We said it would be we thought within 2 years, but it looks like it's going to be more like within 3 or 4. So our timing was a little off, we'll admit to that. But anyways, it's the Royal Bank of Scotland announced the first part of this week that they told all their clients it's time to sell all your stocks, securities, things like this, get all your money out because they'll all be worthless soon. I think that's kind of alarmist, but they did have a good point that when the shit hits the fan, and it's going to hit pretty soon, there'll be so many people charging for the exit, trying to get out, get their money out of this and that, that you probably will get stampeded and won't be able to get your money out, and you'll lose everything that you have. Your assets will be worth zero. So, as just an advice to you, I don't give financial advice. You might want to do some research on this yourself. I refer you to another Dollar Vigilante column by Jeff Berwick from this week, or maybe it was I think it's just, we posted this on our Facebook page. You can go there and look it up. It has a picture of an office of the Royal Bank of Scotland on top of the story. You might want to read that. When I read it, it kind of put kind of a knot in my stomach for a while, and I realized, well, that's reality. You got to deal with it. As with all economic events, timing is very, very difficult to be precise and predict. And I don't know exactly when and if this is going to happen, but I think it's something that you should certainly check out if you have a lot of money invested in stock markets. I think they're doomed. That's all I have to say. Okay, so that's current events. And those were both from the Dollar Vigilante. You can go to their website too, just the Dollar Vigilante, Jeff Berwick, and you can look up recent stories that they have in archives, and you can find the stories there. I would encourage you to do so. There's always a kind of a deal at the end of all the things, urging you to subscribe to their various products that they have available. I find their economic news worthy of a subscription, and I subscribe to them. I don't follow everything they do. Some of the stuff isn't really relevant to the things that I'm involved in, but it's always still interesting, and it helps me to form a more complete picture of what's going on around me and make good decisions with regard to the business that I operate. So for what it's worth, I do endorse that. And I want you to know that these people that make economic predictions, they aren't 100% correct. Okay, so don't rely on them to be your brains. You have to do some thinking on your own, and like I said, a lot of the stuff won't be terribly relevant to everything you do, but you can still see how it might have some impact on the financial dealings that you're involved with. So, I find the Dollar Vigilante to be a very good source. I also like Sovereign Man Confidential with Simon Black. I think they're both excellent sources for real news about real economic stuff that you can count on, that doesn't have a bunch of propaganda in it. And so that's there for my free. By the way, I don't get anything for pumping these guys up and making you think that they're God's gift to investors, that which I think they probably are, but that's another story. Okay, on to tonight's show. In the late summer, I did a story, and I meant to get back to the Hillary Clinton Chronicles sooner than this, but it's not always possible to do things. And I was doing some cleaning and remodeling in my office where I do this show on Thursday nights, and I happened to misplace the last remaining copy that I have of a project that I did back in 1995-96. It's called the Top 50 Unethical Acts of the Clinton Administration, and it was it was a blog before there were blogs, and I started it in a place called GeoCities, which is now no longer in existence, and I don't even think you can find any trace of this online. So there is, that just tells you that not everything that you post online will be there forever. This is gone. This copy is the last remaining copy, and let me tell you, this took about 1.5 years of my life to put this together. It's only about 35 pages, but I was working about 60 hours a week and doing this in my spare time, among other things. But anyway, it's one of the things that I've done in my life that I'm kind of proud of, and so I'm happy I found this again and trying to bring it to all of you for tonight's show. Now, in doing some preparatory, trying to get some more of the current Hillary fiascos and crimes against the American people involved in tonight's show, just to kind of whet your appetite and show you what I'm trying to show is that it's a pattern of behavior. That's she well, as a child, she was kicked out of, played women's soccer, and I think she was finally asked to by the other teams in the league. They didn't want her out there because she was kind of psychopathic in her attack of the other team. She would physically try and hurt people. She's probably tortured pets. And I don't have any documentation of that. Just saying that it's kind of the way her personality is. She's very vindictive. She has no empathy for anybody but herself. So, recently, we posted this just about an hour ago on our Facebook page. I say we, meaning me. This is from the summer when WorldNet Daily put out 22 very important Hillary scandals through her career. And the number one in this is Clinton's turned the IRS into Gestapo. And this is something that isn't just today. It isn't just when she was in the State Department. This isn't just something that's happened. This happened from almost the moment Bill Clinton was elected president. He took office in January of 1993. He was elected in 92 in November. And his first year was just full of scandals and problems and this and that. And Hillary was just still Hillary. And she had really, really low numbers. Nobody really liked her. And here came the 1994 midterm elections, and the Democrats just got slaughtered at the polls. And for the first time in something like 40 or 50 years, the Republicans gained control of both the House and the Senate. It was such a tidal wave. That turkey Newt Gingrich became Speaker of the House because of this. And Newt's not somebody I admire, so that wasn't something that was good. But the Clintons realized that they were in deep trouble, and they formed what they called an enemies list. Unfortunately, I didn't make the list, so I guess my blog wasn't that well read. There weren't enough people out there taking me seriously, so I didn't make the list. But a lot of people did, and one thing that almost all of them had in common is they got audited by the IRS. And the Clintons have used this power over other people, this power to intimidate them, to just to ruin their lives just because they could, because of the fact that Hillary is a vindictive, mean, sociopathic, psychopathic personality. One of the people that during this time that they unleashed the IRS on, this was before they unleashed the IRS. This is somebody that they unleashed the U.S. government on. This was a William Kelly. This was after his taking office. President Clinton was in Chicago for a town hall meeting, and Mr. Kelly stood up during a question and answer period and asked the question. He says, you ran for office campaigning for tax cuts for the middle class, and yet you signed into history the largest tax increase in the history of the world. Well, Bill Clinton was just furious. I mean, his veins were standing on his neck and his head, and his face was red. He was furious. So the question and answer period is ended. Mr. Kelly leaves. The next day, police officers, and I don't know if these were federal officers or Chicago officers. It probably doesn't, because Chicago is kind of an extension of the Democrat Party. It probably doesn't make a big difference. But Mr. Kelly was arrested and held without charges for 48 hours, which is legal for the police to do. This wasn't. Eventually, he was charged with being in the vicinity of the president. And I wasn't. I've tried to do a little research on this. I don't think that's in the criminal. It's not a crime anyway. Eventually, the charges were dropped, and it seemed to be kind of a coincidence that was only after William Kelly decided to run for Congress that they did drop those charges, and he didn't go to trial. They thought that would probably give him a lot of free name recognition for what he wanted to do. There were also a lot of other people that were enemies of the president. They're on the enemies list. One of them was former head of the travel office. This is Travelgate, and now this was 1994. Some of you listening might be too young to know about this, but I'm sure that some of you, if you're like maybe 50 years plus, you remember all this stuff, or you should. If you don't, shame on you. When the president was elected, they came into office, and one of their big financial supporters was also owned a charter airplane service when they would fly people around. They wanted to be the travel agent for the White House, so that when the president was traveling, they would have a charter plane for the press, and they could use that as it's their business. They know what to do. And to be fair, the president has the right to choose whoever he wants to do that sort of thing. But the person that occupied that office, the White House travel secretary, had held that office through several administrations. And he was very popular with the press. He just was what is rare in government. He was a good guy. Took his job seriously, tried to do a really good job. But anyway, Hillary Clinton, she wanted to make this seem like it wasn't, they weren't just dumping on this quote unquote good guy that the press really liked. So they kind of faked a story that he was being fired for incompetence. And they just marched into his office, told him to empty his desk, and they watched him empty his desk like he was really, a suspicious character, and they marched him out. And then they kind of made all these, they weren't really accusing him directly, but the indirect accusations that he had done something that was inappropriate as a travel secretary, and they were going to replace him with their people. And that was one of the statements that I believe Hillary made to somebody who had the job of filling all these positions. He says, "Get those people out and get our people in." And that's kind of how they took every position. They wanted to do all this. Among the other things they did is they fired every U.S. attorney, which is the president's prerogative. He's in charge of the judicial branch of the judges. And so, but he did that. He took care. He just took all those people out of his job and replaced them with his hand-picked flunkies. Included in those was an attorney, Paula Casey. She was a former campaign worker for Clinton, and she was also one of his former law students. And she was assigned to the Little Rock office. And while there, she personally squashed numerous criminal referrals from the Resolution Trust Corporation regarding the fraudulent whitewater loans, check kiting, phony tax deductions, and diversion of money from Madison Guaranty depositor accounts to Bill Clinton's political campaign. All of which could have or should have put both Clintons in prison for over 100 years. And there are just so many crimes that were involved in Whitewater, not Watergate. Hillary was also involved in Watergate, by the way. She was one of the lawyers going after Richard Nixon. And she was fired from that job because, and let me get this quote. I gotta find this quote. She was fired from this job. Let's see, that's the wrong page. Oops. Okay, here it goes. This is the person that was in charge of the lawyers team was Jerry Zeifman, and he was a lifelong Democrat. He wanted to get Nixon, but he didn't want to get him by cheating. He fired her because he said she was unethical, dishonest. Excuse me. She was an unethical, dishonest lawyer. She conspired to violate the Constitution, the rules of the House, the rules of the community, and the rules of confidentiality. He also refused to give Clinton a letter of recommendation, making her one of only 3 employees he snubbed during his 17-year career. So, so her career, she was age 27 at the time. So that's kind of part of that pattern of behavior. She doesn't really go by the rules. She doesn't care about anybody else or the consequences of her actions. She only cares about her goals. And she wanted to put a notch on her gun that she brought Nixon down. And unfortunately, she got fired before she could do that. Well, anyway, in our previous episode dealing with Hillary, I talked about how she had taken over as part of her healthcare, which was going to be her domain in the co-presidency of the Clinton administration. And she had taken over I guess you'd say how healthcare ran or was run. And anyway, in doing so, she centralized command of vaccines. She wanted it all to be in a central place, and they could distribute it to the various states as the states needed it. And that would, because they would be in one place and the government was buying, they were buying in larger volume, they'd get a better price, which is kind of bullshit. But people think that if you buy a bigger volume, then you're going to get a better deal per lot. But the warehouse that she chose had a failing. It wasn't readily apparent that this was going to be a problem. And they started out, I believe it was in the spring or the winter. And it wasn't until it got into the summer months and it got rather hot that they realized the building had no air conditioning, or it was discovered by people who know about vaccines that the building had no air conditioning and all the vaccines were ruined. And this was with fall coming up, flu season and all that. Plus, they had vaccines that they normally give children for things like measles, mumps, rubella, and all that was ruined. Well, this caused there's a big chain reaction of events that happened. I'm not going to blame the pharmaceutical companies entirely. They're not blameless, but they're just responding to the market conditions. And they said, well, these vaccines, we try and make the disease or the viruses as weak as possible so that the body can destroy them, and they won't make them very sick, if sick at all. And in the same time, the body will be able to create antibodies which will fight a future infection and immunize them against some of these diseases. And I believe in that technology, but what happened was they realized that because the way they were now, the government had taken over the distribution of vaccines, that they were going to have to make their vaccines stronger than they were making them, because in their weakened state, they couldn't depend on the government to manage the warehouse where they're being stored properly enough to make sure that they were actually valid vaccines when they got released. So these vaccines are much stronger. They carry, in order to, or the viruses were stronger, but in order to keep them a little bit weak, they would add little bits of mercury and things like that to keep them alive, but make them weak enough that the body could finish off the job. Now, to keep the cost down, doctors discovered they could bundle these vaccines and give them 4, 5, or 6, sometimes 8 at a time to young children. And here's the problem. Each one of those has a little tiny bit of mercury in it. And if you don't have a strong enough blood-brain barrier, that mercury can get into the brain. And I think there's a real link between these vaccines and autism, which has risen dramatically since the early 1900s or 1990s, excuse me. And anyway, so I think that Hillary Clinton is probably the one person that's probably her mismanagement, her feeling that we just had to do this to save money has probably caused hundreds of thousands, if not millions of children to become autistic. And she probably, if she knew, she would deny it, but I don't even think she knows. She doesn't have any realization. She's not smart enough to realize that she's one of the people that caused this to happen. As I said, the pharmaceutical companies aren't blameless, but they're just trying to do what they're told to do. They should have stood up and said something. But then again, we know what happens to people who stand up against the Clintons and say something. They get investigated by the IRS. They get destroyed. So they were probably just being smart. Now, in a later episode of this, maybe number 3 or number 4, I don't know, I'll talk about the Whitewater and exactly what was involved in that. It's kind of complicated what happened, but it is an important feature of kind of how they rose to power. You have to realize that, and I think all of you have probably seen enough news coverage, news footage of Hillary Clinton to realize that this woman couldn't command more than just slightly over a minimum wage salary anywhere. As a lawyer, she would probably, the only way she could make money at the Rules Law Firm was after her husband was elected governor of Arkansas, and then it was only because she was the lawyer who had no scruples and had no problem doing things that were illegal for her clients. That's kind of how she is. Anyway, we'll get into that in a future episode, probably in March, but maybe in February. We'll see. Anyway, in this top 50 unethical acts of the Clinton administration, number 8, which was getting near the top of the list, Vincent Foster. He was the Clintons' counsel for Whitewater. He was the president's lawyer. He gave them legal advice on everything they did. And he was the highest government official to meet an untimely death since the Kennedys. He could have killed himself on July 20th, 1993, as Robert Fisk, Clinton's first independent counsel, claimed, and Kenneth Starr, the second independent counsel, also decided, but there remains several unanswered questions about the facts that are known in this case. Here are a partial list for your consideration. Now, I want to add this list is courtesy of Chris Ruddy, who's now at Newsmax.com. He helped fund that and helped start that, I guess, not fund it, but he wrote an excellent book called The Mysterious Death of Vincent Foster, and I recommend that book to anybody and everybody. This will give you some insight into Hillary Clinton, and it doesn't even mention her name very much, but it tells you all the things that were going on around this scene and around this thing, and I want you to know that she's a megalomaniac, and she was pushing all the buttons. Okay? So, now, just to give you some background, Vincent Foster his body was found at Fort Marcy Park, which is just off the one of the major arterial streets that leads into the Washington, D.C., the 10 square mile. And it's kind of a historical landmark. It's, I don't know, I've heard different things about it from different people. One of my internet friends at that time was one of the directors of the Smithsonian Institute. He said he drove by that park every day on his way to work. So he'd be going to the Smithsonian, he'd drive by the Fort Marcy Park. So it was a pretty well-traveled highway and a place where people would stop and do a rest stop and go pee and all that sort of thing. It wasn't a huge bunch of property, but there was a wooded area, and some people would go and do picnics there. They would go kind of walk in the woods, and it was kind of a place where people could maybe have a random encounter with somebody and maybe exchange some money for some drugs or something like that. There was some probably some illicit behaviors went on, usually more in the evening hours than in broad daylight. But that is kind of my impression of how it was explained to me, what it was like there. It wasn't a really desirable place to stop. It wouldn't be a place that you would take your children necessarily all the time. But it was it was pretty close to a majorly traveled thoroughfare. So it wasn't really invisible to everybody either. And Vincent Foster, his body was discovered there by people walking in the park, and then everything turned kind of upside down after that. So here's kind of the some things about this murder, suicide, or whatever it was that just don't seem to make any sense, and they're inconsistent with the official story, the official narrative that came out of both independent counsels. Number one, paramedics who were there on the scene, the people you have a body in the woods, you call paramedics first. They come in, they testified that there was very little blood at the scene. And what we mean very little is probably hardly any. There was a little bit of blood that had come out of Vincent Foster's mouth, and the blood trails ran in 4 directions. Now think about that for a minute. It means that if he was standing up, blood coming out of your mouth would go down your chin. If he was laying down on his right ear, it would come out of the corner of your mouth and go down towards your right ear. If it was on his left ear, it would go out of the corner of your mouth towards his left ear. And if you were upside down, it would go out of the top of your mouth towards your nose. And he had blood trails going in all 4 directions, which kind of indicates to me that the body was moved. But that's just me. And the fact that there was hardly any blood there is really inconsistent with a head wound to a living person. So there used to be a deal online where there's a video of someone who shot himself live, shot himself in the head in a live thing, and there was just blood everywhere. Even just remembering, I didn't want to watch that. It kind of just started up. I thought, why did I click on that? I turned it off. But I can't get that out of my head. And here it's like 21 years later, it still freaks me out just to think about it. When you get shot in the head, there's so much blood in your head. That's the brain is the most important organ. The body does all it can to keep it just full of, it needs the oxygen that's carried in the blood. It needs the sugar for the energy. It needs the blood also nourishes the nerve endings and helps everything work. The blood is really essential for the brain. So anyway, the fact there was hardly any blood there was not it wasn't good. I'll put it that way. That's the first thing that should have been, alarm bells should have gone off everywhere. Second thing, prior to his demise, Mr. Foster had hired 2 lawyers on July 19th. Not one, he hired 2. That's because he was involved in some major stuff and I think he needed 2 because if it's harder, this was a kind of a dangerous thing that these people were entering into. And if you hire one and something happens to them, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. But you have a backup lawyer, so they both would know everything they needed to know, and it would be harder for them to do, if 2 of them end up in car accidents or falling out of windows or something like that. Then it becomes much more suspicious. But it's just one. So I think he was doing that as a protect his, cover his ass type maneuver. But he was in charge of covering up the Whitewater that we briefly mentioned before, and we'll talk about in a future episode. And he had failed very badly. he could see that everything was about to unravel, and it really did. A lot of people went to prison. One of the people that was instrumental in that is his last name is Tucker. I think it was Larry Tucker. He's occasionally a guest on Alex Jones' show. That guy has got. He's a former Green Beret. He's a real patriot. He realized that what they were doing was criminal. He didn't like it. He had been part of their, the Clinton team at one time. But he went in and he made photocopies. He used a copy machine and he copied all these documents that proved that their things weren't up to snuff. And he was releasing this to the press, and they had a special counsel had been formed, and there was it ended up a lot of people went to prison, including a couple of them that died in prison. I think because they wouldn't keep, they kept talking, and so one of them was known to have a weak heart, and he got the wrong medicine, and all of a sudden he was dead. So that's how it goes. He became another person in the Clinton body count. But anyway, he had, this is another next question that came up in my mind is, why would you pay for a lawyer, not one lawyer, two lawyers, to launch a defense for yourself and to help protect yourself from things that are going to happen, and then shoot yourself the next day? I don't know. So on July 20th, that was the next day, he ate lunch in his office, and then he grabbed his jacket. It'd be like sports jacket or whatever. And he left the White House with the words, "I'll be back." That's the official narrative. And then we were supposed to believe that he picked up a White House beeper, drove to his Georgetown townhouse, got a gun that no one in his family recognizes, that had only 2 bullets in it and no matching ammunition in his townhouse, office, or Arkansas home, drove to a lonely park in Arlington, walked 200 yards on a dirt trail without getting even a trace of dust or dirt on his shoes, to a steep slope, went down into some thick bushes, sat down, shot himself, and then threw his glasses 19 feet away through heavy brush and wound up lying down, supine, perfectly straight, legs together, arms straight down at his side, and the gun still in his hands with no fingerprints on it, and trickles of blood running from his mouth in 4 different directions, including uphill. Yeah, so it just doesn't make any sense. And to complicate, they did an extensive search of the areas surrounding around this. I mean, all over that. They never found the bullet. They actually found some bullets from the Civil War. But they never found that bullet. Despite firing the gun in his mouth, there was no blowback or visible blood splatter on the gun. There were no powder burns inside the mouth. There were no skull fragments ever found. Normally, a .38 would blow out a 4 to 5 inch hole with blood and brains everywhere. Because of the noise and the mess, most sophisticated hitmen today repack their cartridges with half a charge. And this would account for a tiny 1 inch hole in the back of Vince's head. Okay. But, I mean, that's conjecture. We don't know. And unfortunately, the people doing this investigation either were scared out of their wits and just decided to go along and cover it up rather than risk them turning out like Vince Foster, or they're just dumb as rocks. And I don't think Ken Starr was dumb as a rock. I don't think the first investigator was dumb as a rock. By the way, one of the investigators on Ken Starr's team quit in disgust, and he just clammed up, kept his mouth shut. He wrote a letter saying he just didn't want to work on this. He was just totally, he didn't want his name associated with this investigation. He went as far away as he could to California, and he told the people in the law office where he worked there that any inquiries about this would be referred to Ken Starr back in Washington, D.C. He didn't want anything to do with it. He was also afraid to speak. Okay, so anyway, there. Um, okay, in any kind of forensic investigation, they go and they look at everything. Um, so there were some mystery blonde hairs found on Vince, um, and while Hillary is a blonde, I'm not sure they were hers. They could have been. If he was in her office or she had been in his office, they could have picked it up. I mean, that could be explained. But there was also a lot of carpet fibers on his clothing, and semen was found in his underwear. Now, in today's age, where we have the crime investigation, CSI TV, and everything, I mean, who is it that would think these things aren't important? I don't know. I think they're pretty important because they kind of tell you some stuff about it. No effort, and this was as of 1997. No effort has ever been taken to find the source of those fibers. Some witnesses also saw a menacing-looking Hispanic man. And I think Hispanic man could mean maybe some Italians are kind of swarthy, darker skinned. They get out in the sun a lot, so it could have been something like that. It could have been somebody who was maybe Italian heritage who was trying to look like he was a Hispanic man. I don't know. It could have been a Hispanic man. And they said he was standing by a white van with its big door open near Vince's car just before the body was found. Oh, that's something else. His car was there, but there was somebody at the park 45 minutes before the body was found. He had stopped to use the restroom facilities there. And at that time, the coroner had already pronounced that Vincent Foster had died prior to the time that this guy stopped, and there were no cars in the parking lot. His car was the only car there. Or there was no white van, there was no Vince Foster car. So he testified to an FBI agent that was actually the case. And this guy, his name was Knowlton, Patrick Knowlton. And what he got for 20, I think it was 20 days later, 21 days or 27 days later after this fact, he was informed by somebody that the FBI agent, and Agent Monroe, who had taken his statement, had actually changed his statement so it would go along with the official narrative. So he had actually tampered with evidence. There's a written statement. That guy should be in prison. Okay, and now we're going to fast forward to that evening. The White House is in turmoil. They're in panic mode. The park police, and I have a theory that Vince Foster was killed somewhere outside of Fort Marcy Park, and the body was dumped there because then it would be in the jurisdiction of the park police, who are just basically meter readers. I mean, they do not have a criminal investigation division. They don't know how to do this, and they screwed up the crime scene. They screwed up a lot of the evidence. They were a catastrophe happening. They went to the White House to inform the White House that Vince Williams' body had been found in Fort Marcy Park, and then they were taken to a hallway and told to sit there for over 2 hours while Bernie Nussbaum, Patsy Thomason, and Maggie Williams went through all of Vince Foster's papers, putting the ones that they didn't want these people to see into boxes and carted them away to Hillary's closet upstairs. And they did this as in plain view of these people. They were carrying out boxes of paperwork out of a person's office who was found dead at Fort Marcy Park. Now, at this time, no one had ruled this a suicide. This is still, all deaths, when you're a police investigator, every death should be treated as a homicide until proven differently. So nothing in that office should have been touched. It's all evidence. And yet they were able to take boxes and boxes, including what I'm sure were Hillary's billing records from her time at the Rose Law Firm, which would have put her in prison had they been found. And they took them up to her closet. And then it was a big news story for weeks. The missing billing records. And then mysteriously, one day, Hillary said she found them in her closet. She doesn't know how they got there. Well, I can tell you how they got there. Bernie Nussbaum, Patsy Thomason, and Maggie Williams carried them up there like they were ordered to by you, Hillary. And the parts that were incriminating in those billing records were, of course, not there because she said it never happened. There was no evidence of anything there. But there was incriminating evidence there, and she got out of going to prison. Now, how would that have been, having the first lady in this country in prison for the criminals evidence the criminal activities that she was involved in the Whitewater? Some of this stuff is just, you can't believe it. She wrote contracts that let these people borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars without any collateral. It's just amazing. Bankrupted a bank. They laundered that money through into their own pockets, and it's amazing what they did. Anyway, and they got away with it. Okay. Okay, now another thing that was kind of puzzling is they never found a suicide note. Now later they claim to have found a suicide note. Now this is kind of weird. The note was torn into 27 pieces, and it was discovered in a briefcase, and as they pieced it together, it was something like, "I'm sorry," or whatever. I don't know what it said exactly. It didn't matter. But it was torn in 27 pieces without leaving a fingerprint. It did not have a single fingerprint on that piece of paper. And I think that's a pretty good trick. In a midsummer Washington, D.C., when it's kind of hot and sweaty, there was not one single fingerprint on any one of those 27 pieces. By the way, the note says nothing about suicide. In the final part of a note where you would sign your name, there was no name signed. After an independent analysis of the note by a very well-known handwriting expert, it was declared to be a forgery. So they planted a fake suicide note in a briefcase that had previously been looked at and was declared to be empty. And then later it was declared to be a forgery. That tells me that they're trying to cover up something. They're trying to lead us to a conclusion that's a false conclusion. They're trying to support their test, their version of the truth, which is not the truth, that he committed suicide when he didn't. That's for sure. We're not sure how he died, but it's pretty impossible that he shot himself the way they claim he did. I mean, okay, let's see here. We had the White House also demanded crucial crime scene evidence that had been collected by the Park Police. I mean, they weren't total Jethros on that. They did have some of the stuff that they thought was evidence and should be kept, but those included like his beeper that he had taken when he had left his office, and the beeper would also be and this makes me think that he may or may not have taken it. It may have been put on his person by somebody else, like slipped in a pocket or something. But because a beeper can also be somewhere you can locate where somebody is. But they were able to recover that beeper and the briefcase. So the briefcase, they looked at it and it was found to be empty. But then mysteriously, 27 pieces of a torn up note, suicide note, were found in it later. This is just crazy. Well, I called this an unethical act, and it's probably more a criminal act. Vince Foster was the point man in the Whitewater cover-up, and that was number 11 in my unethical acts, and we'll cover that, like I said, in an upcoming episode. And as such, he had in his possession many documents that would have brought a quick end to the Clinton administration. Immediately after his death, Hillary Clinton made several calls from Arkansas to key White House aides, who then proceeded to bar the Park Police and FBI access to the Foster office for over 2 hours. And I told you what they did to her. They just ransacked the office, took all the records upstairs into her office. Okay, so anyway, there has been speculation that including these documents were the missing billing records for Hillary's time at the Rose Law Firm. And Vince Foster was the one who had taken those billing records out of the Rose Law Firm in the first place. A second unusual aspect of this incident was the use of the Park Police to investigate the death of the highest-ranking United States official to die under suspicious circumstances. One would think that the FBI right there in Washington, D.C., that they would have been used instead of people who spend most of their training was spent knowing how to read parking meters. The third suspicious action was the initial denial of the late-night phone activity that was later very evident when phone logs were inspected. I mean, they denied that they had done all these calls, and then it was pretty evident that they'd made these calls and how many calls they made and how long the calls were and who they were to. For those who say he was murdered, contend that he knew too much and he had to go because he was about to crack, and that would have ended the Clinton presidency right then and there. And it would have. People have speculated on how much prison time they were forcing. I think it's Bill Clinton was facing possible 127 years in prison for the things that he was implicated in, and Hillary Clinton was 105 years in prison for her crimes. Okay. And then if you are saying that it was a suicide, there are only more questions. I mean, why would a guy who was risen to the counsel, this is one of probably the highest jobs a lawyer can have. He was counsel to the president. Had he already been dumped on him for the Travelgate firearms? He was one who was supposed to clean that up, and he didn't. He was too ethical, I think. He just couldn't lie about what was happening, and he realized that Billy Dale was a good person and that his life was being ruined so that they could make friend for the people that were Hillary's pals to be the new travel agents. Was he caught between a moral rock and a hard place, not wanting to betray friends while at the same time facing committing criminal acts to protect them? Surely he didn't kill himself because he and Hillary were having an affair. I mean, Hillary doesn't play on that team. She plays on the other team. And also, here's some other things that weren't widely publicized. Vincent Foster took three separate overnight trips to Switzerland. Why did he do that? And why didn't his wife know about this? What was he doing there? Was he making sure that secret bank accounts that the Clintons had were moving them around so that they couldn't be traced back to them, or putting them under different names, or possibly put them under Chelsea's name, or somebody else who's a trusted person is complicit in this? I don't know, but these are the questions that should have been addressed, were never addressed, were never answered. And I really urge all of you to read this book, The Strange Death of Vincent Foster. When I read it, I could not put it down. It was a page turner. It was a true story, and the whole thing about it was just amazing. Fabulous story, and we're nearing the end of the show. I want you to know that Patrick Knowlton, who's a guy whose testimony was altered, all the people involved in this case, including Ken Starr, who was supposed to be a real stand-up guy, he was visited by over 20 people who tried to intimidate him to retract his statement. They tried to make up stories about him stopping off at Fort Marcy Park for a gay liaison with somebody. and whether he's gay or not, I don't think he is. He denied that he was. Shouldn't have anything to do with the truthfulness or not of his statement. He was trying to help. He didn't know what had happened. He didn't know very much about it. He was there within minutes, and there were park police there investigating something. He didn't know who Vincent Foster was, and he was kind of physically threatened. So there's a lot of reason to believe that Vincent Foster took his secrets with him to the grave, and the other people involved were scared to say anything. They were afraid. They're afraid if they came forward and said something, their life was over. And if it wasn't their life, it had been their family's lives. The people that are connected to Hillary and to Bill, those people they don't play nice. They're very, very, very bad people. And she's running for president again. And anybody out there that thinks that she would be a good president, you guys have to have your head examined. You do not know the real Hillary Clinton. So we're coming to the end of tonight's show. Thank you, everybody, for listening. In February or March, we're going to have part 3 of this. We're going to talk about Whitewater and explain what that was all about so that you understand how they used this to really launch his presidential bill. This is how they used it. Was kind of a criminal operation to raise money for him to run for president. And that was what vaulted him into that office, is that he was in a backwater state, and he wasn't really that great a governor, and he had a lot of problems, bimbo eruptions and all that, which those are other people that they sick the IRS on. I mean, almost every single person that came forward to testify against Bill Clinton, to accuse him of a rape and everything else, got audited multiple times by the IRS. Joseph Farah of WorldNet Daily and Christopher Ruddy of the man who wrote the great book about the death of Vince Foster, they were repeatedly audited by the IRS, and the audits didn't stop until the Clintons left office. It goes on and on and on. So thank you to listening, everybody tonight. Thank you, Jules, for allowing me to be a part of your network. I just love it getting on here and talking about some of this stuff. It makes me only feel good to know that I'm doing what I can. And you can do what you can by spreading this message and getting your friends to listen to the archive of this show and to realize what a horrible person Hillary Clinton is. Good night, everybody.